The Grand Synod of the Ethelgardian Ascendancy did not shout. In the immemorial history of their species, the raising of a voice was considered a surrender to entropy, a chaotic vibration that signaled the collapse of logic. Instead, the chamber, a vast spherical hollow carved from the living heart of a rogue moon, hummed with the low, resonant thrum of subvocal debate. The walls, lined with towering strata of memory crystals, pulsed with a rhythm that matched the collective heartbeat of the council. Here, decisions that spanned star systems were made with the cold, geological patience of glaciers grinding down mountains. But today, the hum was discordant. A sharp, jagged frequency of unease cut through the usual harmonics of governance, centering on the holographic projection hovering above the obsidian dais. It was a projection of the station of the Weeping Star, a remote, failing outpost on the very fringe of the Ascendancy's territory, bordering the desolate, uncharted void known as the Null Sector. The station was a ruin, a rotting carcass of plasteel and spent fuel cells, slowly spiraling into the gravity well of the violent violet gas giant it orbited. It was a shameful blemish on the Ascendancy's record of perfection, a legacy of a failed mining initiative from 3 cycles ago. High Legate Vrax, his carapace shimmering with the iridescence of high office, manipulated the hologram with a flick of a slender, multi-jointed claw. The projection stuttered, showing the structural integrity warnings in flashing crimson glyphs. He looked down at the assembled council, his compound eyes reflecting the myriad lights of the chamber. To the Ascendancy, the concept of waste was anathema, yet the Weeping Star represented a sunk cost so profound it threatened the economic symmetry of the entire sector. But the debate today was not merely about the station's decommissioning. It was about the error that had occurred during the evacuation 6 standard months prior. A clerical error, a statistical anomaly in the logistics manifests. A creature had been left behind. Not one of their own, for no Ethelgardian would ever be abandoned by the collective, but a contractor, a human. The species was new to the galactic stage, considered by the High Synod to be a frantic, short-lived race of chemical volatility, possessed of crude technology and a bewildering lack of philosophical grounding. They were useful for dirty, dangerous labor in high-radiation zones, their biological redundancy allowing them to survive conditions that would scramble the delicate neural pathways of an Ascendancy citizen. But they were viewed as tools, temporary and disposable. The logic remains sound, Vrax intoned, his voice amplified by the acoustic architecture of the sphere. To launch a retrieval mission for a single biological unit of Grade D intelligence is a net loss of resources. The fuel expenditure alone outweighs the indemnity clauses in the Terran trade agreement. The creature, this engineer, has undoubtedly perished. The atmospheric scrubbers on the Weeping Star were operating at 12% efficiency at the time of evacuation. The food synthesizers were offline. The thermal regulation was failing. We are debating the retrieval of a corpse to satisfy a diplomatic formality. A ripple of agreement moved through the chamber, a shifting of robes and the clicking of mandibles. It was the rational conclusion. Humans were fragile. They required specific temperature ranges, constant caloric intake, and frequent sleep cycles. 6 months on a station that was effectively a tomb was an impossibility for such a species. The station had been locked down, the command codes scrambled to prevent unauthorized access, effectively sealing the human inside a dying metal coffin. However, a dissonant note arose from the lower tier of the amphitheater. Sub-Overseer Lyra, younger and less calcified in her thinking than the High Legates, stepped forward. Her bioluminescence was dim, a sign of respect and hesitation, but she projected a stream of data into the center of the room that contradicted the calmness of the death sentence. "High Legate," she began, the translator smoothing the clicks of her native tongue into the formal trade dialect. "I submit a variance to the projection. Deep-range passive sensors in the Null Sector have detected anomalies emanating from the Weeping Star, not the anomalies of decay, but of pattern, rhythm. There is a coherence to the electromagnetic emissions that violates the model of entropic collapse." Vrax dismissed the data with a wave of his hand. Automated systems failing in sequence, a death rattle of the machine spirit. "It is not random," Lyra insisted, the light on her carapace pulsing brighter with defiance. "The thermal signature of the station has not dropped to absolute zero. In fact, it has stabilized. The orbital decay has been arrested. The station is holding position against the gravity shear of the gas giant. An automated system cannot rewrite its own orbital parameters without command authorization, and we revoked those codes. Unless the machine has achieved sentience, which is impossible, there is an external variable. The human, Vrax scoffed, the sound like dry leaves rubbing together. You suggest a primitive grease monkey, a being evolved for persistence hunting on a dirt ball, has overridden the encryption of an Ascendancy Class 4 citadel and halted its destruction. With what tools? The maintenance bays were stripped. I suggest, Lyra said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried immense weight, that we do not understand the variable we introduced. If the human is alive and if the station is operational, we are legally bound by the Galactic Charter to investigate. Moreover, if he has accessed the core archives, he possesses state secrets. We cannot leave him to rot if he has broken the seal of the sanctum. The mention of the sanctum silenced the room. The Weeping Star was not merely a mine. Deep within its bowels, below the ore processors, lay an ancient listening post, a relic of the Ascendancy's ancestors, sealed away for centuries. If a primitive had cracked the firewall of the ancestors, the sacrilege was incalculable. Send the reclamation fleet, Vrax finally ordered, the decision tasting bitter on his tongue. Not a rescue mission, a sanitization protocol. We go to confirm the death, purge the data, and scuttle the station into the gas giant, and if the creature still draws breath, we will correct the error of his survival. The journey to the Null Sector was a voyage into silence. The Hand of Judgment, a sleek monolithic cruiser of the Ascendancy fleet, glided through the void like a shard of midnight. Commander Kalen stood on the bridge, watching the stars thin out until only the velvet darkness remained. He felt a deep, instinctual revulsion for this mission. To clean up a mess left by logistics was beneath a warrior of his standing, yet the orders were absolute. He had studied the file of the human. Name, Elias Thorne. Profession, structural systems engineer. Age, 42 Terran cycles. The image attached to the file showed a creature with soft, pale skin, tufts of graying fur on the cranium, and eyes that looked deceptively dull. There was no armor on the creature, no natural weaponry, just fleshy manipulators and a fragile skeletal structure. Kalen could not fathom how such a being had built a civilization, let alone survived 6 months in the dark. As they approached the coordinates of the Weeping Star, the tension on the bridge shifted from boredom to confusion. The sensor officer, a prodigy named Thull, twitched his antennae, his fingers flying across the haptic interface. "Commander," Thull said, his voice trembling slightly. "Readings are incorrect." "Clarify," Kalen snapped. "The station, it should be dark, it should be freezing, but sensors indicate the reactor is running at 110% capacity. The thermal venting is artistic. It creates a harmonic shield against the radiation of the gas giant. And the hull, simply look, Commander." Kalen stepped to the viewport as the cruiser broke the shadow of the local moon. The gas giant loomed, a swirling storm of violet and bruised purple, but orbiting it was the station. It was no longer the rusted, drifting hulk they had left. It had changed. The silhouette was different. Where there had been jagged tears in the hull, there were now smooth, silver patches that gleamed with a strange luster. The chaotic array of communication antennas had been stripped away and reassembled into a single, massive spire that pointed not toward the Ascendancy homeworld, but out into the deep dark of the uncharted void. But the most striking feature was the light. The station was not just lit, it was glowing. Veins of blue plasma ran along the exterior in geometric patterns that defied standard Ascendancy engineering. It looked less like a machine and more like a living organism, pulsing with a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. "Hail them," Kalen ordered, his curiosity warring with his unease. "Channel open," Thull replied, "broadcasting on all Ascendancy frequencies." "This is Commander Kalen of the Hand of Judgment," he spoke into the comms. "Identify yourself. You are in violation of Ascendancy salvage protocols. Power down your reactor and prepare to be boarded." Static hissed through the speakers, followed by a sound that made the crew recoil. Music. It was a chaotic, primitive vibration, heavy on low-frequency percussion and screeching strings. Then the music cut out, replaced by a voice. It was raspy, tired, but terrifyingly calm. "This is Station. Well, I've been calling it the Lighthouse," the voice said. "You guys are about 3 months late for the pickup. Did you bring coffee? I'm all out of coffee." Kalen exchanged a glance with his tactical officer. The nonchalance was jarring. "You are Elias Thorne." Tease me. Look, you can board, but watch your step in Sector 4. I rerouted the gravity plating to create a centrifuge for the hydroponics. If you walk in there without magnetizing your boots, you're going to be pasted on the ceiling. And don't touch the conduit running along the main corridor. It's unshielded. Unshielded? Kalen asked, incredulous. That is a violation of Safety Code 7 Alpha. Yeah, well, Safety Code 7 Alpha didn't account for having to cannibalize the shield generator to build a water filtration system that actually works, the human replied dryly. Just dock at Bay 2. It's the only one I bothered to keep pressurized. The boarding party consisted of Kalen, Lyra, who had insisted on accompanying the fleet, and a squad of 6 heavily armed peacekeepers. They wore full environmental suits expecting toxins or decompression. When the airlock cycled open, however, the sensors indicated a breathable atmosphere, not just breathable, optimal. The air tasted crisp, scrubbed cleaner than the air on the Hand of Judgment. It carried the faint scent of ozone and greenery. They stepped into the main corridor and stopped. The station was unrecognizable. The Ascendancy aesthetic was one of smooth curves and hidden mechanisms, a sterile beauty. This place was an exposed nervous system. Cables ran along the walls in thick bundles, stripped of their casing and rewrapped in thermal tape. Panels were missing, revealing the throbbing machinery beneath. Yet there was an undeniable order to the chaos. The lights were not the harsh white of the standard issue, but a softer amber hue that seemed to reduce eye strain. By the ancestors, Lyra whispered, tracing a line of welding along a bulkhead. This is barbaric. He has welded support struts directly over the access panels. How does he service the relays? I don't, a voice came from the shadows. The squad raised their weapons. Elias Thorne stepped out from behind a stack of crates. He looked thinner than his file photo, his face gaunt and covered in a thick mat of facial hair. His jumpsuit was stained with grease, coolant, and blood, patched in a dozen places with duct tape and scraps of hull plating. He held a heavy wrench in one hand, but he held it like a scepter, not a weapon. He didn't flinch at the rifles pointed at his chest. I don't service the relays, Elias repeated, walking past the peacekeepers as if they were furniture. He moved with a strange, gliding gait, accustomed to the microfluctuations of the station's gravity. I bypassed them. The relays were creating a 0.04-second lag in the power distribution. Wasteful. I hardlined the reactor directly to the life support and the new comms array. Efficiency is up 40%. Kalen signaled his men to lower their weapons but kept his hand near his sidearm. You are the human contractor. You were left for dead. I noticed, Elias said, stopping at a console that was a nightmare of wires and alien crystals jury-rigged with Terran circuit boards. He tapped a few keys. You guys have a weird way of defining evacuation. But hey, it gave me some quiet time. Do you have any idea how much potential this station had? It was choked, strangled by safety protocols and bureaucratic limiters. You were running a race car with the parking brake on. Lyra stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her protocol. You speak of limiters. Those protocols exist to prevent catastrophic core meltdowns. By bypassing them, you risk an antimatter cascade. Elias turned to her, his eyes surprisingly sharp and bright. No, the protocols exist because you don't trust the machine. You treat the systems like they're static, dead. But a station this size, it breathes, it has a rhythm. Once you listen to it, you realize it wants to run hot, it wants to push. I didn't break it, I let it off the leash. You have altered Ascendancy property, Kalen said sternly. You have defiled the architecture. I saved your property, Elias countered, his voice hardening. 3 days after you left, the gravity shear from the gas giant spiked. The navigational computer was too slow to compensate because it was routing calculations through 3 layers of unnecessary permission checks. I stripped the permissions. The station adjusted. If I hadn't, this place would be a debris field right now. He gestured for them to follow. Come on, I want to show you the garden. Garden? Lyra asked. They followed him deeper into the station, down into the belly where the ore processing vats used to be. The massive industrial chamber had been transformed. The vats were cut open, filled with compost created from, Kalen shuddered to think what. But growing out of them were plants. Not just Terran plants, but alien flora scavenged from the initial mining samples, hybridizing, twisting together in a lush, verdant explosion of life. UV lamps, scavenged from the medical bay, bathed the room in artificial sunlight. The air here was rich with oxygen. Hydroponics was dead, Elias explained, patting a broad leaf of a purple fern. So I improvised. The biological scrubbers are more efficient than your mechanical ones. Plus, it's good for morale, even if the morale is just a population of 1. Lyra looked at the irrigation system. It was using coolant lines. You are cooling the reactor with water that cycles through the plants. Heat exchange, Elias nodded. The plants love the warmth, the reactor gets cooled, closed loop, zero waste, it's simple thermodynamics. It is reckless, Lyra murmured, though Kalen could hear the awe in her voice. Ingenious but reckless, you humans. You do not fear the failure of the system. We expect the system to fail, Elias said, looking at her. That's the difference. You guys build things to last 1,000 years, so when they break, you don't know what to do, you panic. We build things to break so we know how to fix them. We know that everything falls apart eventually. The trick isn't to prevent the fall, it's to learn how to catch it. Kalen felt a chill. The philosophy was alien to him. The ascendancy sought perfection, stasis, the eternal preservation of order. This human embraced chaos, danced with it, and wove it into a functioning lattice. We are taking you into custody, Kalen announced, trying to regain control of the situation. And we are scuttling the station. It is a hazard. Elias laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. You can't scuttle it. I have the codes, Kalen said. I changed the codes, Elias said. And I changed the frequency of the scuttling charges. They're now part of the external sensor array. If you try to detonate them, you'll just send a really loud ping into the null sector. You weaponized the self-destruct mechanism. Kalen's mandibles clicked in shock. I turned it into a microphone, Elias corrected, and you're going to want to hear what it's picking up. The mood shifted instantly. The casual arrogance of the human vanished, replaced by a grim seriousness. He walked to a large wall monitor, a patchwork of screens he had mounted together. He typed a command sequence that was dizzyingly fast. When I fixed the power grid, I had extra juice, Elias explained, his back to them. So I boosted the sensors. I wanted to see if anyone was coming for me, but then I looked deeper, into the null sector. You guys avoid that region. You call it empty space, dead space. It is a void, Lyra said. There is nothing there. There's no stars, Elias said, but it's not empty, it's full of signal. The screen flared to life. It showed a graphical representation of the null sector. Where the ascendancy charts showed blackness, Elias' screen showed a web of red lines, slowly pulsing, converging. What is this? Kalen asked, stepping closer. I found the old listening post, Elias said softly. The one in the basement. I hooked it up to my new array. These are wake trails, warp signatures, thousands of them, and they aren't random, they're a formation. Lyra gasped. A fleet, but the energy readings, that is impossible. It would require the resources of 100 systems. Or one very hungry hive, Elias said. I've been tracking them for 2 months. They're moving slow, silent. They don't use standard comms. They communicate through gravitational waves. That's why you never heard them. Your sensors are looking for radio, for light. They're moving in the dark, using the mass of the stars to hide. He turned to face them. They're heading here, to the ascendancy borders. This station, this ruin you left me in, it's the only thing in the entire sector loud enough to hear them coming. And because I boosted the output, it's the only thing loud enough to warn you. Kalen stared at the red lines. The strategic implication was horrifying. An invasion force of that magnitude, striking from the blind side of the galaxy, would shatter the ascendancy before the High Synod could even convene a quorum. The human hadn't just fixed a station. He had built a watchtower on the edge of the abyss. Why, Kalen asked. You were abandoned, left to die, you owe us nothing. Why build this? Why warn us? Elias looked down at his grease-stained hands. Because I'm an engineer, I fix things. I don't care who broke them. I don't care who owns them. When I see a problem, I solve it. You guys. You have a civilization, families, kids, or larvae, or whatever you have. That's a system. A complex, beautiful system. I'm not going to let it get smashed just because the people running it are arrogant pricks. He looked up, his eyes hard. But we have a problem. The array is holding, but the reactor is redlining. I need your ship. I need you to dock the hand of judgment with the station and link your core to my grid. If we combine the power, we can send a pulse through the gravitational network. We can light up the null sector like a Christmas tree. We can expose them. But it's goy. NG to fry your ship's FTL drive. Kalen looked at Lyra. The scientist was trembling, her eyes fixed on the data. He is right, Commander. The mathematics. They are elegant, terrifyingly elegant. If we do not act, the first worlds will be burning within a solar cycle. And if we do this, Kalen said slowly, we are stranded here with him. Better stranded than dead, Elias said. Besides, I have a still distilling alcohol from the fungus in Bay 3. It's not bad. The decision was made in the silence that followed. It was a breach of every protocol, a violation of every order. But Kalen was a warrior and he recognized a threat when he saw one. He tapped his comms. Bridge, initiate hard docking procedure. Reroute all auxiliary power to the external airlock couplings. Prepare for a full core dump. Commander, Thul's voice came back panicked. That will fuse the drive coils. Do it, Kalen roared. The next hour was a blur of frantic activity. Humans and aliens worked side by side, a juxtaposition of biology and philosophy. The Ascendancy engineers, initially horrified by Elias' modifications, soon found themselves swept up in his manic energy. Elias barked orders using terms they didn't understand. Jerry-rig, bypass, kick it until it works. But the logic behind his madness was undeniable. He bridged the two systems not with elegant code, but with brute force, forcing the alien software to shake hands with his cobbled-together interface. As the hand of judgment poured its energy into the station, the weeping star began to sing. The vibration was felt in the teeth, in the bones. The entire structure groaned as the hull plating expanded. Holding at 90%, Lyra shouted from the command deck Elias had built. Harmonics are destabilizing. Let them rattle, Elias yelled, his hands flying across a keyboard that was smoking. We need the amplitude, give me everything, drain the life support if you have to. Initiating pulse in 3, 2, 1. The station didn't fire a beam. It didn't launch a missile. It screamed. A pulse of gravitational distortion, amplified by the station's modified geometry and fueled by the heart of a warship, blasted out into the null sector. It was a wave of pure force that rippled through the fabric of space-time. On the screens, the darkness of the null sector vanished. The gravitational wave hit the hidden fleet, stripping away their stealth cloaks, forcing their mass signatures to flare white-hot on the sensors. It was not a fleet. It was an ocean of ships. Tens of thousands of biomechanical constructs, organic leviathans drifting in the dark, waiting to feed. The sheer scale of the enemy was enough to stop the hearts of the Ascendancy crew. They were looking at an extinction event. But the pulse did more than reveal them. The feedback loop Elias had designed caught the resonance of the enemy ships. The gravitational wave slammed into them, disrupting their delicate navigational organs. Formations shattered. Ships collided. The element of surprise was violently ripped away. Transmission sent, Lyra whispered, falling back into her chair. The data packet is on its way to the High Synod. They will see everything, the fleet, the threat, the solution. The station groaned one last time and powered down. The lights dimmed to emergency red. The hum of the reactor slowed to a dull throb. The hand of judgment was dead in the water, its systems fried. Silence returned to the command deck, but it was not the heavy silence of the Ascendancy. It was the exhausted, heavy breathing of survivors. Kalen walked over to Elias, who was wiping blood from his nose with a greasy rag. The human looked ready to collapse, but he was grinning. That, Elias wheezed, was a hell of a kick. Kalen looked at the human. He saw the fragility, the softness of the flesh. But beneath it, he saw something the Ascendancy had lost eons ago. The fire. The ability to look at the impossible and laugh. The ability to take a broken world and hammer it into a weapon. You have saved the Ascendancy, Kalen said, his voice full of a new emotion, respect. You have saved us all. I just fixed the radio, Elias shrugged. Now about that drink. Act 3. 3 months later. The station of the Weeping Star was no longer a ruin. It was the busiest port in the sector. Ascendancy dreadnoughts, sleek and terrifying, formed a defensive perimeter around the gas giant. Construction drones buzzed like insects, expanding the station, adding armor, weapons platforms, and sensor arrays. The war against the null sector hive had begun, but the Ascendancy was not fighting blind. They had the map. They had the warning. In the center of the station, the grand chamber had been restored, but it was different now. The sleek obsidian surfaces were covered in diagrams, schematics, and whiteboards filled with scribbled equations. Humans and Ethel Guardians moved together in the halls. The cultural shock had been profound, but the necessity of war had forged a rapid alliance. The humans brought their chaos, their adaptability, their refusal to accept impossible. The Ascendancy brought their resources, their discipline, their technology. It was a symbiosis that terrified the enemy. High Legate Vrax stood on the observation deck, looking out at the fleet. He felt a strange discomfort. The symmetry of his world had been broken. The logic of the Ascendancy had been flawed. They had almost perished because of their obsession with perfection. It is, Unsightly, Vrax said, gesturing to a section of the hull where a human repair crew had bolted a massive, ugly railgun onto a delicate spire. It works, a voice said beside him. Elias Thorne wore a new jumpsuit, clean and pressed, with the insignia of the chief architect on the breast. He didn't look like a prisoner or a contractor anymore. He looked like the owner. Function over form, Vrax, Elias said, leaning on the railing. We can make it pretty later if there is a later. The High Synod is debating the integration of your species, Vrax admitted. It is contentious. You are disruptive. You break rules. You ignore hierarchy. We're the wrench in the gears, Elias smiled. Sometimes you need a wrench to stop the machine from eating itself. There is something else, Vrax said, turning his compound eyes toward the human. The signal you found, the hive, we have analyzed their trajectory. They were not just drifting, they were running. Elias stopped smiling. Running from what? That is the question, Vrax said. The data from the pulse. It went deep, past the hive, to the edge of the galaxy. We found a structure, an artificial ring larger than a star system. It is dormant, but the hive was moving away from it. They are not the invaders, Elias. They are refugees. The two of them looked out into the void. The victory against the hive was just the beginning. The human engineer had fixed the station, and in doing so, he had peeled back the curtain on a universe far larger and far darker than either species had imagined. Well, Elias said, taking a deep breath and cracking his knuckles. A ring the size of a star system, that sounds like a hell of an engineering problem. He turned back to the chaotic, bustling command center, where humans and aliens were arguing over torque ratios and shield harmonics. Good thing I'm not done fixing this place yet. We're going to need a bigger antenna. The camera pulled back through the viewport, past the cobbled-together, beautiful monstrosity of the station, past the fleet of silver ships and blocky human transports, drifting out into the silence of the null sector, where the shadows were deep, but no longer impenetrable. The human had lit a fire in the dark, and for the first time in history, the galaxy wasn't just watching the entropy take hold. It was fighting back. And at the center of it all was one engineer, a roll of duct tape and a refusal to die.